All right, so let's go into the final part of today's show, Trevor, and that is going to be the defense. We're going to look at the same exact type of conversation that we had in the offensive show. We're going to go position by position, then we'll talk coaching, then we will talk big picture. How are they going to be? And this one is going to be a lot more debatable for me because last year offense was a disappointing one in some big moments. This year is like, okay, which excellent group will be better? And that's kind of how I look at it from the defenses. So this one's going to take on a little bit of a different tone. But let's start with the position players, or the players, and by position, and start with the defensive line. It always starts with the big boys, right? Like you lose Javonte Jean-Baptiste, you lose Nana Osafo-Mensah from last year's rotation. I believe that's the only guys that you lost from last year, correct? Yes. You add RJ Oben, you add Bryce Young, you add. And then now you've got some young players kind of stepping in the mix that weren't necessarily there last year. So let's begin with the defensive line. Trevor, which unit right now is Notre Dame better on the D-line right now than when they were with how last season, based on how last season played out?
Yeah, I'm taking this season's D-line. First and foremost, I think that one, from everything that I've heard and just through natural player progression, I think that this D-line unit is deeper. Going into last year, I loved what Javonte Jean-Baptiste turned into. But if I'm being 100% honest, I didn't know that he was capable of having that kind of season because he was very much a rotational guy at Ohio State. I look at that and I say, well, we're replacing his production with RJ Oben's, and RJ Oben was a proven producer at Duke. Call the defensive tackles a wash. I would even err on the side of they're better because they are just a year more into this system, a year more into being those dudes on the D-line. Then you compound that with the young talent that they got with Bryce Young and, another year of development for Botello and Josh Burnham and some of those guys. I'm taking this year's D-line.
Yeah, I think that's it's you can maybe debate it, but I don't think there's much of a debate because, as you mentioned, you have everybody coming back, and what you've added is more dynamic than what you had last year. Now, will RJ Oben match his production that you had? Like that? That's the biggest question. I mean, you had 16 tackles for loss and 8 sacks from last year's big end position. Can they match that or not? I don't know, but I don't think they necessarily have to. I expect Viper to be better this year, not just because Jordan Botelho comes back. Junior Tuihalamaka is a year older in the system. I think he'll be better than he was last year. How much better? I don't know, but I think he'll be better. But I think the presence of Boubacar Traore at the very minimum is going to be a situational pass rusher that they did not have last year. And then you look at the other position and, even if RJ is just a wash with Javonte, I think the combination of Josh Burnham and Bryce Young as the number 2 and 3 and I love Nana. I think Nana was such a valuable rotation player last year, but Josh Burnham and Bryce Young are just going to be more dynamic and just better. And it's certainly in the pass game. So I think then you've got Riley Mills coming back. You've got Howard Cross coming back. Jason Onye now has a year under his belt in the rotation. Donovan Heinisch is now a junior as opposed to, obviously being a sophomore last year. He's going to be older, stronger, experienced. You add Armel Mukum, who has really taken advantage of Gabriel Rubio coming back. And Gabriel Rubio's injury sucks for right now. It's going to suck for September potentially, but it's going to end up, I think, being a blessing in disguise when he comes back, whether it's October, November, because you're going to add a 300-plus pound fresh guy to your defensive line for that stretch run. And I think that can end up, not that I wanted it to happen, but hey, if it did happen, and so here's the benefit that could come from that. So I think it's going to be better. And I think the where it's going to show itself as better is potentially as pass rushers, but I really think it's going to come down to the run game. I think this D-line is going to be more impactful with negatives, tackles for loss, getting penetration, making some of those plays this year than it was last year. I think that's really where you're going to see the biggest difference because I think this is going to be a stronger group, a bigger group than it was a year ago, and a deeper group, a much deeper group than it was a year ago. From an experience, I mean, you had some of the same guys. You had Jason Onye last year and Donovan Heinisch last year. What's the difference? Well, Jason Onye had never played a meaningful down in his life until before last year. Donovan Heinisch had never played a meaningful down of his life. And I mean, talking about college. prior to last year. Now those guys have played a couple hundred snaps. And so they're more experienced. Now Armel Mukam is your number 4, 5 guy is the one with no experience. Where last year it was like your 3, your 4, and your 5. And so it's a much different scenario. Josh Burnham was really going into his first year in the rotation last year. He's now got a year under his belt. Junior was going to his first year as in the rotation under his belt. Now he's more experienced. Boubacar was a true freshman last year. Armel was a true freshman last year. Now they're sophomores. So I just think overall there's a lot more depth, a lot more size, and a lot more playmaking ability up front than there was a year ago. And that's why I think this line is the pick as well. Let's go linebacker, because this one to me is the one I had the hardest time with. There's different ways to look at it. I'll just speak for the both of us, and you correct me if I'm speaking improperly. There's no debate which room is more talented. It's this one. This one has more God-given athletic ability than last year's, because you lose you lose Maris Leofau and J.D. Bertrand, but you add older versions of Drake Bowen and Preston Zinner and Jaden Osbury, plus you add Kingston to the mix. Like, to me, athletically, there's no discussion. Athletically doesn't equal better production, better football play. That's the debate. So you lose 2-time captain, 3-year starter J.D. Bertrand. You lose 2-year starter Maris Leofau, who's really been in the rotation since 2020, missed 2021 with an injury. JD was a 5th-round pick. Maris was a 3rd-round pick. You're really replacing all 3 starters from your linebacking core last year, Trevor, when you consider that Jack Kaiser was your starting rover. He's now at will. So you're also having to replace your starting rover from last year. Even though that guy returns, he's not returning at rover. Sure. So really your linebacking core is going to look completely different this season. Will it be better? Will it be better overall? Will it be better early, late? You can take it however you want. Will the linebacking core be better this year than it was last year?
I think it will be for their length and their athleticism. It's so tough to replace the leadership that J.D. Bertrand left out, right? And that's shoes that kind of tandem Jack Kaiser and Drake Bowen are going to have to fill. Max Bullough, the linebacker coach, has been very vocal that they are going to play a 5-rotation linebacking core, which I love that move. But it's tough to say which one I would take more, because you're having to play essentially 5 guys to replace the value of those core 3 that you lost, in my eyes. But I think at the end of the day, when we're sitting here in December, which room do I think is going to be better? I do think it's going to be the 24 room, because they are longer, they are faster. I mean, just on paper, they're bigger, right? I mean, J.D. Bertrand was, great player. I think he was 6'1" with cleats and a helmet on, and you have Drake Bowen, who is all of 6'2", 6'3". You have Kingston Viliama-Asa, who is all of 6'3", and he's young. So I think with the depth of this year and with the overall ceiling of the talent, I'm going to give it to this class of linebackers this year. The only thing that I'm missing out on is the leadership, which I do think, whether it be from other position groups or up and coming new guys in this room, I think you're still getting, but just not from JD.
I feel a lot of this position a lot like I did at running back. I'm back and forth. I believe I said in the chat or in the post on the message board, I believe I said linebacker, and then I've kind of been back and forth. And really, honestly, I'm having a hard time picking one even now. I'm going to go with 2024 simply because my personal bias, and I'll be honest, is I tend to value the talent over the experience, even at a place like linebacker. I always, if it's close, yeah, you may lean towards the experience, but sometimes I think overall depth, I don't think it's all that close. I think last year's J.D. Bertrand is one of the most underappreciated and underrated linebackers Notre Dame has ever had. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of fans that have convinced themselves that he's a slightly more athletic version of Joe Schmidt. And the NFL is trying to tell you, guys, he's not. He's an NFL football player. That's why he was drafted in the 5th round of the NFL draft. J.D. was an athletic player. He had good power for his size. The only thing he lacked was size and length. He has short arms. He's not a real big guy, but he's a very good football player at Notre Dame. He was your leading tackler for 3 straight years, and he was wicked smart and a great leader. But part of the reason I'm optimistic that this groom is going to be better is because he was a great leader. Because from what I was told from various sources, he took Drake Bowen under his wing the entire season and was like, okay, I'm going to teach you what it's like to be a pro at this level so you can come and be my replacement next year. And I've talked a lot about that this summer. That means Drake's going to be ahead of the game from where he would have been on just normal development. That's huge in football to have that veteran leadership. But I think the reason I think it's going to be better is twofold. I don't think Drake is going to be as consistently effective as JD. But I think Drake is going to make more big plays than JD. He's going to make more mistakes than JD. But he's going to make more big plays. But I think they're going to be improved everywhere else. I think the will position is going to be better. Maris was an impactful player for Notre Dame last year, but he was very inconsistent when it came to his execution. They're going to be more consistent there this year. So you're going to lose a little bit at Mike, but I think you're going to gain it at Will. So that right there makes the whole effectiveness and assignment correctness a wash. Once you take that out of the mix, then I don't think it's really that much of a debate in my view because of the overall talent. You're getting Jalen Sneed. We had Jalen Sneed last year, yes, but now you get junior year version of Jalen Sneed who played a couple hundred snaps last year. He's going to be better than he was last year. Drake Bowen, as good as I think he'll be as a sophomore, I do think Kingston was better than him as a freshman. Now, that doesn't impact this year because Drake's always going to be your ahead of Kingston. But if I'm going to say who's better, Drake or Kingston, as true freshmen comparing 23 to 24, I think I shouldn't say better. He's more ready to play the day one than Drake was, partly because of the program he came from. This is a kid that has played on national television at St. John Bosco. He's played against elite level talent where Drake was always. I don't know that there was ever a high school football game that Drake Bowen played in where he wasn't the best player on the field. Kingston can't always say that because of him. He had to play against Modern Day and some great programs. And so sure. I think he's more ready to play day one than Drake was a year ago. Even though I think right now Drake's ahead of Kingston right now, that's what I believe to be true. And I actually think the future of linebacker is not one or the other. Mike, I think they're both going to start eventually. Mm-hmm. And then at Rover, you don't have the experience of Jack Kaiser, but you're deeper now. And you've got Jalen Sneed, obviously can play that position, and then Jaden Alsbury can play that position. So, and then of course they didn't use the Rover a ton last year. I mean, Jack Kaiser had about 100 fewer snaps than Thomas Harper, and when you start throwing Clarence Lewis's nickel snaps in there, he was like 150 to 200 snaps beneath what the nickel was last year. So I think you're going to be deeper. I think you're going to be more athletic. I think they're going to make more big plays, and I think this linebacking room is going to be even better getting after the quarterback. That's a pure projection. But when I look at the size and the athleticism that they're going to be throwing from the inside with Drake and Kingston and Jack Kaiser and Jalen Sneed, I think this linebacking core is going to be really impactful rushing the quarterback. And that's going to factor into it as well. So, yes, we'll see more mistakes. Yes, we'll probably see more 20-plus yard runs allowed this year compared to last year. But I think we're going to see a lot more plays than we saw last year for a host of reasons, including the defensive line is going to be even more impactful. And that makes the linebackers more impactful. So it's not by a lot, but I do think that's the reason I go with the 24 group over the 23 group is that right there. So, Trevor, we're going to look at the secondary a little bit differently. We're going to first look at it separately. So the two outside corners at one, and then we'll look at the two safeties and the nickel in part two. And then we'll also evaluate it as a whole. So let's first begin at corner. Lose Cam Hart, lose Clarence Lewis, Christian Gray, Jaden Mickey become more prominent players. You add Leonard Moore to the mix. Cornerback, Benjamin Morrison's now a junior, sophomore last year. Cornerback, what say you? Is Notre Dame better in 2024 based on where we are right now compared to where they were last season?
This one was a tough one for me because of the loss of Cam Hart. If I'm looking at the cornerback room as a whole, I do still like the 2024 room. For one, Ben Morrison, like a lot of other players, is a year older. I mean, it's weird. It feels just like yesterday that it was 2022 and he was the young guy that was making all the plays, and now he's the guy, right? He's a year older. He has more experience. Christian Gray has all of the potential in the world. I mean, I've heard you mention it on other shows, but I also, when I watch them live, I do get confused a lot of who is who. Play styles are very similar. I love the young talent that they added. Leonard Moore, his length, his size is going to be great. And of course, Jaden Mickey. I love Jaden Mickey. He's a very aggressive corner, which I like. Not afraid of physical contact. I like where this room is at. I think, again, I kind of evaluate the room as a whole of where their ceiling is at and where their floor was. And I think the middle kind of takes care of itself. And I think that the cornerback room this year has a higher floor than where it was at last year.
I agree with the last part that you said the ceiling is higher, correct? Is what you said?
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. Right now, I'm taking last year's corner room right now, simply because the way I look at it is the additional experience for Christian Gray and Jaden Mickey doesn't overcome losing Cam right now. I do agree with you, however, there's a chance it could be better. And I won't be shocked if it is, but there's a lot more I need to see it, because I think Cam Hart was special last year.
Yeah.
Now, do I think if Christian Gray is as good as I think he's going to be, that they're going to be better? Yeah, I do. And I also think Benjamin Morrison is going to be better than he was a year ago also. So the potential's there. I don't really disagree with your overall take. I just can't pull the trigger on it being better because of Cam Hart until I see Christian Gray go be what I think he can be.
Sure.
And that I see that Jaden Mickey has kind of figured out his role and bought into it. And I also want to see if, can Leonard Moore help out a little bit? So it's not huge, because I do think you're more, but last year you had Benjamin Morrison, Cam Hart, Jaden Mickey, and Christian Gray. Well, now you've only got 3 of those 4 guys. So, I mean, if you want to just look player for player, you lost Cam Hart and you replaced him with Leonard Moore. Well, right now, that's a big drop-off. I think Leonard Moore eventually is going to be really good. I've been high on the Leonard Moore train since they landed him the summer before last. But Leonard Moore in 2024 is not in the same league as Cam Hart was in 2023.
Sure.
Now, the question is going to be, the end result is, does the experience that Christian Gray and Jaden Mickey and Benjamin Morrison all gained trump that? That's where it could end up being better. But as of right now, today, August 20th, I've tried to talk myself into it, and I just can't. I just can't. So I'm going with the cornerback room. Safety, completely different story for me, Trevor. You bring back Xavier Watts. He now has a full 2 years of experience under his belt as a safety. You trade DJ Brown for Rod Hurd, big upgrade. You trade Adon Schuler for Ramon Henderson, pretty significant upgrade for me. And I think Thomas Harper is a more dynamic player than Jordan Clark. I think Jordan Clark will be a little bit more steady player. So it's pretty even there. Even if you were to say Thomas Harper was better, the overall safety position is, to me, this is the spot on defense where Notre Dame has made by far the biggest jump. Like, I think linebacker is going to be a little bit better. I think D-line is going to be a little bit better. I think corner's just not quite as good, could maybe be a little bit better. Safety, for me, is a position where I think they're going to be significantly better than they were. I love DJ Brown. Great kid, leader, smart, but he just was limited athletically.
Yeah.
Rod Hurd, I think, is a more dynamic player. Ramon Henderson was a really good athlete, just was not a football player. He just was not an instinctive football player. Adon Schuler's the complete opposite. So I think safety is a position where they're going to be a lot better. A lot better.
Yeah, I am 100% on the same page as you. I mean, breaking it down player by player, call Xavier Watts, I guess, a wash if you want to, but he's gotten better, right? So at the minimum, I think you say, well, last year had Xavier Watts. This year they have Xavier Watts. Love Adon Schuler's athletic ability. Couple that with he's a really smart football player, man. I mean, his IQ for the game is there. And then, yes, losing some of the players to the transfer portal and graduation. They're without DJ Brown and Ramon Henderson. There's been a lot of talk about who's going to replace the production of Thomas Harper, since a fair share of players got that kind of like that slot corner nickel playing time reps last year, but I mean, Rod Hurd and Jordan Clark coming into the mix, they are very experienced football players. I mean, between the two of them, they have 4,126 snaps of football under their belt coming into this year. And I think that that's one thing that people kind of forget about is we're replacing an experienced player with more experienced players. Similar to the wide receiver room, we're kind of eliminating the what ifs. They're not able to play the position. We know that they can play football. It's more of the conversation of, are they going to be who we think that they're going to be? And luckily for us, we can go back at the film with Rod Hurd and we can confidently say, yeah, I think that he can. So I think that the safety room this year is going to be significantly better than where it was at last year. And the safety room last year had I forgot the name of the award because it's hard to keep track of all of them. But the award that Xavier Watts won, it's returning that, and it has gotten better.
I think the Rod Hurd's a guy that came out of the Big Ten with over 80 tackles last year. This is a kid that's got over 2,000 career snaps in the Big Ten. Yep. He's just a better player. Now, there was a concern I had. My answer would not have been emphatic. It was better. I've been saying it all summer. You've heard me say that plenty of times. I'm more emphatic now that I've actually seen with my own eyes what Rod Hurd looks like in this defense and what Jordan Clark looks like in this defense, and then just Don Schuler's maturation as a player. Right? Like I felt good about Xavier's going to be a wash at the very least, right? I mean, interceptions may go down, overall play is going to go up. I mean, that's kind of how I look at it. I fully felt that Adon was an upgrade over Ramon Henderson. The question is going to be, how does Rod Hurd make the transition from nickel at Northwestern to safety at Notre Dame? That was the only potential hang-up. Now that I've seen it, all right, they're better, and they're significantly better, in my opinion. And now that's why, and when I look at the secondary as a whole, I think they're going to be better. And I think they're better now than they were last year, because even though corner's not quite as good, we're talking about them having still a top 5 corner room last year and still a top 5 cornerback room this year. It's just by a small percentage, maybe just not as good at some things. Like, I think they'll be better at coverage this year than they were last year with Cam. But Cam was a playmaker that kind of shut down half the field. I mean, he's like, 3 forced fumbles and, great against perimeter runs and perimeter screens and things like that. I mean, think about the first half against Clemson. Every time they kept trying to run those bubble screens and now screens against Cam, and he kept blowing it up in 2022. They didn't try a whole lot of those in 2023, right. And they definitely didn't try any to the field where Cam was. And so slightly maybe not as good, but safety is way better than maybe the cornerback room is. Now, obviously for you, Trevor, the answer is easy because you said they're better at both positions. So obviously the secondary as a whole, you think they're going to be better. For me, I think the secondary is going to be better because of the fact that as a whole, I just think they're deeper. They're going to be better at coverage. Yeah. And they're just overall more athletic. Christian Gray is every bit the athlete Cam Hart was, and he's faster. But Rod Hurd is a much better athlete, in my opinion, than what DJ Brown was. And so overall, I just think this is a deeper group, a more veteran group. I mean, think about it. You have 4 captains in the secondary. Think about that, Trevor. 4 captains. Because Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watts are captains now. Jordan Clark was a captain at Arizona State last year, and Rod Hurd was a captain at Northwestern last year. You had 4 players that have been college captains in your secondary. Yeah. Right? So what's the biggest loss that I had with losing Cam Hart? Leadership. That's a position where he was a great leader, but you're going to be okay there because not only do you have Xavier and Benjamin, but you added 2 Power 5 captains to your secondary in the portal. Not worried about leadership at all. If the cornerback room can be better than it was last year, and you're correct there, they may have one of the 2 best secondaries in all of college football, if not the best. But at the very least, they're top 5 easy, in my opinion, right now, because they're that much better at safety compared to last year, and corner is slightly one. Like, I don't think you're saying they're way better at corner than they were last year, and I'm not saying they're going to be way worse at corner. It's similar. If I have to lean one way or the other, I'd probably go here. Yep. But safety much better, which means overall secondary better. Yep. Let's talk coaching. You lose Chris O'Leary. You replace him basically with Marty Biaggi. I mean, that's because you had Max Bullough as your linebackers coach last year. So Max is technically a full-time assistant now. But Max's role as a football coach doesn't change a ton from last year. I mean, he's got a little bit more authority in that room, but he was your linebackers coach last year. Chris O'Leary was your safeties coach. Now Mike Mickens is the entire safeties coach, secondary coach, and Marty Biaggi and some analysts and GAs are now helping at safety. Al Golden goes into year 3. Al Washington goes into year 3. Mike Mickens goes into year 5. And Marty Biaggi goes into year 2. First year working with the defense. Max Bullott's going into year 2. But you lost Chris O'Leary, who I believe was a very good safeties coach. Take recruiting out of the equation. Just as a football coach, he's a very good football coach, which is why Jim Harbaugh hired him. Because Jim Harbaugh likes football coach, like good football. He didn't care about recruiting in the NFL. Can you coach football? And there's no doubt that Chris O'Leary can coach football. So, coaching-wise, is Notre Dame better, the same, or slightly worse than what they were last season?
I'm going to call them the same if I'm comparing it like from where we're at today to where we were at last year. Losing Chris O'Leary is tough because, to your point, he is just a football guy. He knows ball, great coach. I mean, we saw what he did with Xavier Watts as a safety coach, right? Like he knows what he's doing, okay? But then on the flip side of the coin, you have everybody is a year older. This is Al Golden's 3rd year with Notre Dame. You know, this is Al Washington's 3rd, right? You have
he came in with Freeman's first year. So
that's right.
Him and Golden both came in as part of Freeman's first staff. So 2022, yeah.
Okay. So, we have Washington going into year 3. We have Max Bullough another year under his belt, and I've loved everything that I've heard about him. I'm very excited. He's one of the main reasons why I'm excited to see what this linebacking core does this year, because of how he is as a coach and how he basically what he demands of his players in a good light. And you combine that with their athleticism, I think it's going to be really exciting. Mike Mickens being the defensive passing game coordinator, and it's his 5th year in South Bend. I don't want to weigh, losing one coach being as detrimental, but I think it could have an effect. I think they kind of put the Band-Aid on the bullet hole is making Mike Mickens the overall kind of ringleader and passing game defense, right? But I think as of right now, if I were to take it today, I think it's the same. But I think that overall as a coaching staff, as this year progresses, at the end of the year, I think I'm taking the 24 coaching staff.
Same. I've had to kind of talk my way through it a little bit, but same way you did. I think Mike Mickens is just one of the best in the business, and I think he'll be able to handle this. I think one thing that's going to help too is this new rule that analysts can now be on the field. Yeah, that gives Notre Dame extra bodies to be down there working with those guys. Al Golden going into year 3, I think help. I mean, the more time these kids are in his system, the better they're going to be. And then Al Washington. The big question for me is, who is Al Washington? Is he the guy that we saw in 2022 where the D-line never quite lived up to the hype, to the talent that it had? Or is it like 2023 where I felt like he got everything out of what that line could be last year for the most part? I think Jordan Patel was a little disappointing, but I don't put that on him. I think Jordan Patel put on too much weight and just didn't play the way that he's capable of. I don't blame him. I've always said this, when you look at a position coach and there's a player at a position that's struggling, that's usually I kind of put that on the player more often than not. When it's a coaching problem is when it's happening kind of with several guys. And when everybody else played really well and got better, except for Jordan Patel, I kind of put that more on Jordan. Sure. But I tend to think that Al Washington is what we saw last year is more of who he is as a position coach. So I think that's obviously now he's going into year 3. I think it'd be even better. So I think I give a slight edge to it because of the fact that you retained everybody else and you now have more people that can help Mike Mickens, whereas with the old rules, maybe Mike Mickens doesn't have as much help. And when I mean help, I mean he literally can't be at 2 places at once.
Sure. He
can't be coaching the safeties during individual drills and the corners because they don't do the same drills, nor should they do the same drills.
Right.
So do you have someone that can do that? You've got to have multiple sets of eyes to really watch a position group like that, which is spread across the entire field. You can see everything, but you can't watch everything as in detail. And so I think that helps him a little bit. So I do think it's slightly better, but I think last year's defensive staff was really good.
Yep.
And the big thing for me is I just don't want to see regression. If they're just as good as last year, that's a win.
Yeah.
I just don't want to see a regression with Chris O'Leary being gone, and I don't think we will. Because I think for what you lose for him as an assistant coach from a technical standpoint, you're going to gain some advantages now that they're all in the same room, speaking the same language, talking to each other. I think that you're going to see whereas O'Leary would tell his guys his thing, Mickens would tell his guys his thing, and then they'd have to kind of go figure it out on the field. Now it's like everybody's leaving the meeting room with one message from one coach.
Yep.
And I think that's going to help overcome the fact that they're not going to have the same, position coach during Indy and the technical parts that they had last year. So that's where I'm coming from. So defense as a whole, we thought the offense would be slightly better, so it was going to be better than last year. Now let's look at the defense as a whole. Players, coaching, all of that stuff together. Do you expect the 2024 defense to be better than the 2023 defense?
I do. I think we got longer. I think we got more athletic. And one of the things that not enough people are talking about, I think, is it's been a very active offseason for us. We got Riley Leonard, Mike Denbrock's coming back to Notre Dame. Got these slew of transfer wide receivers coming in. I don't think enough people are talking about that Al Golden is going into year 3. And the jump that he made from year 1 to 2 is fantastic. I'm not saying the gap of progression is going to be as big, but everything is going to be more refined.
We can hope.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if they made if the jump from year 3 was as big as the jump from year 1 to 2? Like,
if that happens, people are going to be talking about one of the best defense, like 2012 defense-esque type of.
Yeah, with 2012 defense with speed, depth.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, yes. If everybody on the 2023 secondary had Kavari Russell speed, that's what we would be talking about. But I think taking all of those factors into account, I'm going to take the 24 team. And I know that this is, doesn't have to be said, but doesn't mean that I think that, the 23 defense wasn't good. Obviously, they were fantastic, right? But I'm similar to you. I will take athleticism and speed and length over the guy that might be physically not all the way there, but a great leader and a great mind. And, you kind of have to take the bumps and bruises with that, which is why I think the game against Texas A&M to start the year is so highlighted. But I think overall, I think we're going to look back and say that this 24 team defense was better. I think it's tough for me to say. I don't want to be the eye test guy because I'm analytical and I dive into stats a lot. But I think in some areas, especially in the big games, you can see, the pass rush is getting after it more this year than it was last year in big games, right? I think worst case scenario, you call the secondary a wash because the secondary played great.
Yeah.
Well,
hold on. You played great. They only ranked 3rd in the nation in pass defense last year, number 1 in passer rating last year, number 2 in completion percentage allowed. And they were only 3rd in fewest yards per attempt allowed. And they only tied Michigan for the fewest touchdown passes allowed. I don't know if that's good or not, but I guess it's okay.
Yeah, it's decent, I suppose. I guess.
Yeah. When you're top 5, like in every category, I'd say that's pretty good.
Twist my arm if we have to have that secondary again, I suppose.
Right. No, but your point is spot on though, right? Like with the defense as a whole, the big thing is just don't regress. Yep. Like if all they are is a wash from last year, Trevor, that's a win. Like, because they were really good last year on defense. Even the Louisville game, you look and say, oh, they lost 38-20. I'm like, they didn't give up 38 points on defense. It was 7-7 at halftime. I don't know what it was 7-7 at halftime, and you forced a fumble and gave your offense the ball in Louisville territory to start the third quarter. Like, you didn't lose that game because your defense. You didn't lose the Ohio State game because of your defense. Yeah, they should have made some plays to win the game at the end, but you shouldn't have put them in that position where 17 points was enough to beat you. The only game where I felt the defense didn't bring it was Clemson. But you know what? That happens to every team every year, right? Notre Dame didn't have the offense to bail them out in that 1 or 2 games a year where they weren't elite. And the best teams do that. Georgia has had those games in 21 and 22 when they won national titles. There were games where their defense wasn't as lights out as it normally is, but their offense bailed them out. You have to be that sometimes. You have to have those games sometimes. And you look at like 2022, for example, Trevor. That Georgia defense was really good all year, but they had to get bailed out by the offense against Ohio State. in the semifinal game because they could not stop Trevor or CJ Stroud in that game. There's nothing. They knew what he's going to do, and there's nothing they could do about it. He just was so good that game. Offense had to bail you out. I don't care who you are, that's going to have to happen from time to time, and Notre Dame didn't have that kind of offense last year. So, but to your point, if they improve, then that kind of gets really scary. And here's my question. If the offense is improved, how does that help the defense? Like that's going to be something that's going to be very fascinating to see with how this team plays out this year. So it's good stuff, Trevor. Very good first show, man. I enjoyed that. That was really good stuff. So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. I appreciate y'all joining us today. Well, actually, you know what, Trevor? Let's actually do one thing before we go. We did not do this. Starting lineup between 23 and 24 team. I'm going to go Viper. I'm going to go 24 version of Jordan Pataho with sophomore version of Boubacar.
Okay.
I'm going to go RJ Oben or Josh Burnham over Javonte Jean-Baptiste.
Okay.
I'm going to go 24 version of the two tackles. I don't see how you can't take the older, stronger, more experienced versions of those players. Linebacker, I'm going to go 24 Jack Kaiser at Will. I'm still going to go at JD at Mike. I just, like that, And then at Rover, I'm going to go with 23 version of Jack Kaiser. Starting lineup. Again, part of the reason I like the linebacking core better this year is the depth.
Yep.
Secondary, 24 Benjamin Morrison, 23 Cam Hart, 23 Thomas Harper. Secondary, Rod Hurd at boundary safety, 24 Xavier Watts at other safety. Now, can I go 23 Xavier Watts at boundary and 24 Xavier Watts at the field? Is that doable? Can we do that?